I never thought I'd become the woman who stands in the rain outside a hotel, watching her husband kiss another woman through the window. Yet there I was, my clothes soaked through, mascara running down my face, feeling like every cliché in every movie I'd ever rolled my eyes at. The November rain in Seattle was relentless, somehow both icy and sharp, yet I barely felt it. I was too numb, too focused on the way James held her face between his hands, the same way he'd once held mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 15 years, I had been Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, respected pediatric neurologist, wife to successful architect James Mitchell, and co-owner of Evergreen Children's Neurological Institute. I had dedicated my life to saving children with rare, neurological conditions. My clinic was my legacy, my purpose, and James had been my partner, my rock, my home. Until today. The text message hadn't been meant for me. James had forgotten his phone on the kitchen counter when he left for what he'd called an emergency meeting with a client. I never checked his phone, never had a reason to. But when it kept buzzing incessantly, I glanced over, thinking it might be important. Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Last night was incredible. Room 718. Don't be late. I miss you already. V. I stared at those words for what felt like hours, reading them over and over, willing them to rearrange into something innocent, something that wouldn't shatter my world. My hands trembled as I picked up his phone, and with a few swipes, I discovered months of messages, photos, hotel receipts. Victoria. That was her name. Victoria Chen. A real estate agent who had worked with James on his latest project. I knew her. I'd met her at company parties. She'd smiled at me, complimented my dress, asked about my clinic, all while sleeping with my husband. I don't know what possessed me to drive to the Grand Hyatt downtown. Perhaps some masochistic need to confirm what I already knew. To see with my own eyes what I couldn't bring myself to believe. Standing there, watching them through the restaurant window, I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, my entire sense of reality. That's when she saw me. Her eyes met mine through the glass, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Recognition, but not guilt, not embarrassment. Instead, a slow, deliberate smile spread across her lips. She whispered something to James, who turned, his face draining of color when he spotted me. I didn't wait for him to come out. I couldn't bear to hear the excuses, the lies. I turned and walked away, my legs somehow carrying me back to my car, though I could barely feel them beneath me. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom, the bedroom we had shared for 15 years, surrounded by framed photos of our life together, our wedding day, vacations in Bali, Paris, Cape Town, the grand opening of my clinic. All of it now tainted, suspect. How long had it been a lie? How many of these smiles were fake? How many business trips were actually spent in her bed? When James finally came home at midnight, he found me sitting in the dark, still in my rain-soaked clothes. "Ellie," he said, his voice careful, measured. "Let me explain." "How long?" I asked simply. He sighed, running his hands through his dark hair, the hair I'd love to touch, that was now repulsive to me. 9 months. 9 months. My throat tightened. "Do you love her?" "It's not like that," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Then, what is it like, James?" My voice was surprisingly steady. "Help me understand how you could do this to us." He sat on the edge of the bed, not meeting my eyes. "It just happened. You were always working late at the clinic, always so focused on your patients. Victoria made me feel seen. I laughed then, a hollow sound that felt foreign even to my own ears. Seen? I've looked at you every day for 15 years, James. I saw you. I chose you. Every day. It's different with her. Then, quieter. She's pregnant. Those two words hit me like a physical blow. I'd wanted children desperately when we first married. But after years of trying, after multiple miscarriages that left me broken and bleeding both physically and emotionally, we'd received the definitive diagnosis. I would never be able to carry a child to term. James had held me as I sobbed, promised me it didn't matter, that we were enough for each other. That was when I'd thrown myself completely into my clinic. If I couldn't have children of my own, I would dedicate my life to saving others. And now, this woman, this stranger, was carrying what I never could. How far along? My voice sounded. Far away, like it belonged to someone else. 4 months. I closed my eyes. And you were planning to tell me when, exactly? After the baby was born? On its first birthday? When, James? I was trying to find the right time. He reached for my hand, but I jerked away. Ellie, please, we can work through this. Work through this? I stood up, suddenly furious. Your mistress is pregnant with your child and you think there's something to work through? What exactly is your plan here? Are you leaving me for her? Or did you think you'd just split your time between two families? Help me understand the scenario where this ends with anything other than divorce papers. He flinched at the word divorce, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I had loved, uncertain, vulnerable. But then his expression hardened. Victoria wants me to be part of the baby's life. I want that too. Then go, I said, surprising myself with the finality in my voice. Go be with her. Go be a father. That's what you've always wanted, isn't it? A child of your own? His silence was answer enough. I stood up, walked to the closet, and began pulling out his clothes, tossing them onto the bed. I want you out of this house by morning. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. Ellie, don't do this. We can talk about it. He grabbed my wrists, forcing me to look at him. 15 years. Don't throw that away. I wrenched free of his grasp. I'm not the one who threw it away. You did that when you started sleeping with her, when you got her pregnant, when you decided our vows meant nothing. He left the next morning with 3 suitcases and a box of personal items, headed for Victoria's downtown apartment. I called, in sick to the clinic for the first time in years, then spent the day in a haze of grief and anger, alternating between sobbing on the bathroom floor and methodically removing every trace of James from our home. By evening, I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. That's when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I wondered if James had come back, perhaps to apologize or collect something he'd forgotten. But when I opened the door, Victoria Chen stood on my porch, looking immaculate in a camel coat, her glossy black hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. Even with the slight swell of her belly visible beneath her coat, she was stunning. Dr. Mitchell, she said, her voice cool, professional. May I come in? I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have screamed at her, cursed her, sent her away. Instead, I stepped aside silently, some morbid curiosity compelling me to hear what this woman could possibly have to say to me. She walked into my living room with the confidence of someone who already owned the place, her eyes taking in the spaces where James's things had been. I see you've been redecorating, she remarked, a hint of amusement in her voice. What do you want, Victoria? I asked, too tired for games. She turned to face me, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, in a gesture that sent a spike of pain through my chest. I thought we should talk, woman to woman. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. James is moving in with me, as I'm sure you know. We're going to be a family. Congratulations, I said flatly. Is that all you came to say? She laughed lightly, as if we were old friends sharing a joke. No, actually. I came to talk about the house. The house? Yes, this house. She gestured around her. James and I will need it once the baby comes. It's much more suitable for a family than my apartment. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. You want my house? Well, technically, it's half James's house too. But yes, we'd like to buy out your share. James mentioned you're very dedicated to your work. I'm sure you'd be comfortable in something smaller, closer to your clinic perhaps. The audacity was so breathtaking that for a moment, I could only blink at her in stunned silence. Then a strange calm settled over me. Get out, I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Get out of my house. Now. There's no need to be hostile, Eleanor. I'm just trying to… I said get out! My voice rose, rage finally breaking through the numbness that had enveloped me for the past 24 hours. You come into my home, the home I built with my husband, and have the nerve to ask me to leave? After you've slept with him, gotten pregnant, destroyed my marriage? What kind of person does that? Victoria's composed facade cracked slightly, her eyes narrowing. The kind who knows what she wants and takes it. James wasn't happy with you, Eleanor. He told me everything. How you're always at that clinic of yours. How you prioritized your career over him, over having a family. Don't you dare, I hissed, stepping closer to her. Don't you dare twist my infertility into a weapon. You know nothing about me, about us, about what we've been through. I know enough, she replied coolly. I know James chose me. I know I'm giving him the one thing you never could. Her words struck me like a physical blow, and I felt tears welling in my eyes before I could stop them. Seeing them, Victoria's lips curved into a smile. Oh, Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Don't cry. It's not becoming. And then she laughed, actually laughed at my tears, a soft musical sound that cut through me like glass. In that moment, something shifted within me. The pain was still there, raw and throbbing, but alongside it grew something harder, colder, resolve that straightened my spine and dried my tears. You should leave now, I said, my voice steady once more. And tell James that if either of you contacts me again except through my lawyer, I'll file a restraining order. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes changed. Perhaps surprised that I hadn't crumbled completely, that I still had fight left in me. Have it your way, she said with a shrug. But think about the house. It would be the civilized thing to do. After she left, I stood in my living room, shaking with fury and a new, unfamiliar emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just anger or hurt. It was determination. A cold, clear certainty that I wouldn't let this woman destroy everything I'd built. I picked up my phone and called Helen, my best friend since medical school and now the co-director of my clinic. Ellie? She answered, concern evident in her voice. Are you okay? You never miss work. James has been having an affair, I said without preamble. For 9 months, she's pregnant. Helen's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of expletives that would have made a sailor blush. That absolute bastard? I'm coming over right now. No, I said firmly. No, I don't need that. What I need is to work. I'll be at the clinic tomorrow. And Helen, I need you to pull a file for me. Look up whether we've ever treated a patient named Chen. Victoria Chen. Chen? Why would… Oh. Helen paused. Is that her? Yes. Just check for me, will you? Of course. Hang tight, Ellie. We'll get through this. After we hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the Seattle skyline, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, James and Victoria were together, planning their future, their family. The thought still hurt, like a knife twisting in my gut. But alongside the pain was a new resolve. They had taken my husband, my future, my chance at a family. But my clinic, the institution I had built from nothing, the place that had saved countless children's lives, that was still mine. And I would use everything in my power to protect it and myself. The next morning, I arrived at Evergreen Children's Neurological Institute earlier than usual, my face carefully made up to hide the evidence of a sleepless night. The clinic occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek modern building in downtown Seattle, its large windows offering panoramic views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Helen was waiting for me in my office, a cup of steaming coffee and a manila folder on my desk. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting, pulling me into a tight hug. Helen had never been one to mince words, which was one of the reasons I loved her. "Thanks," I replied dryly, accepting the coffee gratefully. "What did you find?" Helen's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Victoria Chen. She brought in her son about 2 years ago, before you and James met her. Jackson Chen, age 5 at the time, diagnosed with a rare form of pediatric brainstem glioma. Tumor was deemed inoperable at Seattle Children's. She sought a second opinion here." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. And we confirmed the diagnosis. Dr. Patel was the attending. He recommended our experimental treatment protocol, but the insurance denied coverage. The treatment would have cost upwards of $300,000 out of pocket. "So she couldn't afford it," I murmured, flipping through the file. "What happened to the boy?" Helen hesitated. "Palliative care only. Last note in the file says the tumor was growing. Prognosis was poor. 6 months to a year, maybe." I stared at the file, at the MRI images showing the insidious tumor threading its way through a child's brainstem. I'd seen hundreds of cases like this, each one heartbreaking in its own way. But this felt different, personal somehow. So her son should be, 7 years old now? If he's still alive? Helen nodded. "That's my calculation. Although given the prognosis..." I closed the file, my mind racing. "Have we had any update on his condition? Any follow-up appointments?" "None. They dropped off our radar after the insurance denial. She probably took him to a hospice program." I sat back in my chair, thinking. Was it possible James didn't know? That Victoria had a child, a likely very sick or possibly deceased child, and had never mentioned it? Or was this part of what had drawn him to her, the chance to be a father, to step in and save the day? "Ellie," Helen said cautiously, watching my face. "What are you thinking?" I looked up at my friend, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. "I'm thinking I need to know more about Victoria Chen and her son. Much more." "Be careful," Helen warned. "You're in a vulnerable state right now, and..." "I'm fine," I interrupted, more sharply than I'd intended. Seeing Helen's hurt expression, I softened my tone. "I'm sorry. I need to understand what's happening here, and why it's happening to me." Helen squeezed my shoulder. "I get it. Just promise me you won't do anything rash. James is the one who betrayed you, not some sick kid." "I know that," I assured her. "I would never punish a child for their parents' sins. I just want information." The rest of the day passed in a blur of patient consultations, treatment plans, and staff meetings. I threw myself into my work with renewed focus, grateful for the chance to think about something other than my crumbling personal life. But in quiet moments, my mind kept returning to Jackson Chen and his mother, the woman who had laughed at my tears, who was now carrying my husband's child. That evening, instead of going home to my empty house, I stayed late at the clinic, using my access to medical databases to search for any updates on Jackson Chen's condition. What I found both surprised and troubled me. There were records from Seattle Children's Hospital dated just 3 weeks ago, an emergency room visit followed by admission to the intensive care unit. The tumor had grown significantly, putting dangerous pressure on the brainstem. He'd been stabilized and discharged with enhanced palliative care, but the prognosis was grim. Without intervention, Jackson Chen had less than 2 months to live. And there, listed as the emergency contact, was James Mitchell, not as the boy's father, but as mother's partner. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. James knew. He knew Victoria had a dying son, and he had never said a word to me. Me, a pediatric neurologist who specialized in precisely the condition this boy had. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but I immediately knew who it was from. Eleanor, it's Victoria. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. James and I would like to meet with you to discuss the house situation civilly. Dinner tomorrow? James says Canlis was always your favorite. Let us know. I read the message 3 times, anger building with each reading. The arrogance, the presumption that I would sit across a table from them and calmly discuss surrendering. My home. It was breathtaking. But as I was about to delete the message, another thought occurred to me. A meeting might give me the opportunity to understand what game Victoria was playing, and perhaps why she had targeted James in the first place. I typed a reply. Fine. Canlis, 7 p.m. Then I turned back to my computer, to the medical records of a 7-year-old boy whose mother had stolen my husband, whose life might depend on the very treatment protocol I had helped develop, a treatment that would cost more than most people made in 5 years. A treatment that, as co-owner of the clinic, I had the power to approve or deny. Oh, Victoria, I whispered to the empty office. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The next day passed in a haze of appointments and paperwork, but my mind remained fixated on the upcoming dinner. I left the clinic early to prepare, something I rarely did. Standing before my closet, I selected a midnight blue dress I'd purchased in Milan 2 years ago during a medical conference. One that James had always said made me look intimidating. Perfect. I arrived at Canlis 15 minutes early, requesting a table with a view of the entrance. I wanted to see them before they saw me. Needed those precious seconds to compose myself when they walked in together. The maître d' led me to a corner table overlooking Lake Union, the city lights reflecting on the dark water like scattered stars. Will anyone be joining you, Dr. Mitchell? He asked, pulling out my chair. Yes. 2 people, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. James Mitchell and Victoria Chen. If he recognized my husband's name or picked up on the unusual arrangement, his professional demeanor never faltered. Very good. Would you care for a drink while you wait? Macallan 18, neat. I rarely drank scotch, but tonight I needed the liquid courage. The whiskey had just arrived when I spotted them entering the restaurant. James looked handsome in a charcoal suit I'd bought him for his last birthday. Victoria wore a fitted burgundy dress that elegantly accommodated her growing belly, her arm linked through James's as if they'd been together for years instead of months. My stomach clenched at the sight, but I took a slow sip of scotch and forced my expression into something, approaching calm indifference. They spotted me, and I watched James's face cycle through a series of emotions: apprehension, guilt, resolve. Victoria's expression was harder to read, a practiced mask of polite interest with something calculating beneath. Eleanor, James said. As they reached the table, his voice formal in a way that felt like a stranger's. Thank you for meeting us. I didn't stand to greet them, merely gestured to the empty chairs. James, Victoria. As they settled in, an uncomfortable silence descended. James fidgeted with his water glass, while Victoria studied the menu as if it contained the secrets of the universe. I simply watched them, saying nothing, letting the tension build. Finally, James cleared his throat. Eleanor, I know this is difficult, but I appreciate your willingness to talk. It shows real maturity. I took another sip of my whiskey, letting the burn slide down my throat before responding. Does it? I thought it showed masochism. Victoria's eyes flicked up from the menu, something like amusement playing at the corners of her mouth. I told James you might still be emotional. Perfectly understandable, of course. Is it? I asked coolly. Tell me, Victoria, how would you feel if your husband left you for another woman, especially when that woman deliberately sought him out? James frowned. What are you talking about? No one sought anyone out. Victoria and I met through work. Did you? I turned my gaze to Victoria. Or did you specifically target the husband of the co-director of Evergreen Neurological Institute? The flash of surprise in her eyes told me. Everything. James looked between us, confusion written across his face. What's going on? How do you two know each other? Before Victoria could answer, the waiter appeared to take our orders. We all requested the first thing that caught our eye, eager to return to the conversation. Once he departed, I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Victoria. Would you like to tell him, or should I? Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment, before she recovered, reaching for James's hand across the table. James, I was going to tell you eventually, when the time was right. Eleanor's clinic. I took Jackson there, about 2 years ago. James's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Your son? You took him to Ellie's clinic? Why didn't you ever mention this? Victoria's eyes filled with tears that seemed remarkably well-timed. It was so painful, James. They told me there was nothing they could do for him, that he was going to die. That's not exactly accurate, I interjected, my voice clinical, detached. We diagnosed Jackson with a rare brainstem glioma, confirmed. Seattle Children's assessment that traditional surgery wasn't an option and recommended our experimental treatment protocol, a protocol that has since shown an 83% success rate in similar cases. Then why didn't he get the treatment? James demanded, looking between us. Insurance denied coverage, Victoria said softly. The out-of-pocket cost was over $300,000. I couldn't afford it. I watched James's face as the pieces fell into place. And you never mentioned any of this to me? That your son has the exact condition my wife specializes in treating? That she runs the leading clinic in the country for this type of tumor? I was going to, Victoria insisted. I couldn't find the right moment. And I didn't want you to think I was using you to get to her. Weren't you? I asked quietly. Victoria's eyes hardened. You think I got pregnant as part of some elaborate scheme to save my son? I think you targeted my husband, knowing exactly who he was and who I was. I think you saw an opportunity and took it. What I don't know is why you waited 9 months to broach the subject of Jackson's treatment. James looked stricken, the reality of the situation clearly sinking in. Victoria, is this true? Did you know who I was when we met? Victoria hesitated, just long enough for the answer to be obvious. I knew Eleanor was your wife, yes. But that's not why— Stop, James interrupted, his voice harsh. Just stop talking for a minute. We sat in tense silence as our appetizers arrived. No one touched the food. Jackson was admitted to Seattle Children's 3 weeks ago, I said after the waiter left. The tumor has grown. Without intervention, he has less than 2 months to live. I turned to James. And you're listed as his emergency contact, as mother's partner. James closed his eyes briefly. I met him 2 months ago. Victoria said she wanted to introduce me to the most important person in her life. He's an amazing kid, Ellie. Smart, funny despite everything he's going through. I had no idea. That he could be saved? I finished for him. That your wife ran the very clinic. That might save his life? I knew what Eleanor did for a living, Victoria interjected. But I didn't know about the experimental protocol until after Jackson's last episode. When they told me he only had months left, I started researching alternatives again. That's when I found the papers about Evergreen's success rates with cases like his. I laughed incredulously. So it's just a remarkable coincidence that you happened to seduce the husband of the woman who could potentially save your son's life. Do you really expect me to believe that? Victoria's mask slipped completely then, her expression turning cold, calculating. Believe what you want. The reality is that my son is dying, and you have the power to help him. And there it was, the real reason for this dinner, laid bare. So this is why you wanted to meet, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Not to discuss the house at all. You want me to get Jackson into our treatment program. That's not, James began, but Victoria cut him off. Yes, she said simply. I want you to save my son's life. The audacity was breathtaking. This woman had systematically destroyed my marriage, laughed in my face as I cried, and now expected me to use my position to help her. And what exactly are you offering in exchange? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Since we've established this is a negotiation. Victoria looked momentarily taken aback. I'm not offering anything. I'm asking you, as a doctor, to help a dying child. As a doctor, I took an oath to do no harm. As a woman whose life you've deliberately torn apart, I owe you nothing. I turned to James. Did you know about this? Is this why you agreed to this meeting? James looked genuinely blindsided. No, Ellie, I swear. I thought we were meeting to discuss the house, the divorce, to try to make this transition as painless as possible. Painless, I repeated flatly. There's nothing painless about what's happening here, James. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Look, I understand you hate me. You have every right to. But Jackson is innocent in all this. He's just a child who needs help. Help that only your clinic can provide. A child you neglected to mention to your lover for months, I pointed out. A child whose treatment you prioritized below your affair with my husband. That's not fair, Victoria hissed. I've done everything for Jackson. Everything. You have no idea what it's like to watch your child suffer and know there's nothing you can do. The words hit me like a physical blow, reopening the wound of my infertility, my lost pregnancies. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know what it's like to watch my child suffer. Thanks to my condition and your actions, I never will. James winced visibly. Ellie, please, don't, I cut him off. Don't try to mediate this, James. You've lost that right. Our entrees arrived in another haze of awkward service, the waiter clearly sensing the tension at our table. Once again, the food remained untouched. What will it take? Victoria asked finally, her voice stripped of its usual confidence. To get Jackson into the treatment program, what do you want from me? I studied her face, seeing for the first time the desperation beneath the polished exterior, the mother beneath the mistress. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of empathy, not for her, but for her son, an innocent caught in a web spun by adults who should have known better. Jackson's file is still active in our system, I said after a long moment. Bring him in tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll examine him myself and determine if he's still a candidate for the protocol. Relief washed over Victoria's face, quickly followed by suspicion. Just like that? No conditions? I'm a doctor first. Whatever has happened between us as women, I won't punish a child for it. I stood up, dropping my napkin on the untouched food. But understand this, Victoria. I'm doing this for Jackson, not for you. And certainly not for James. James stood as well, reaching for my arm. Ellie, wait. Can we talk privately for a moment? I looked at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. The face I had loved for 15 years. The face that now belonged to someone else. No, I said simply. We can't. I'll see you both at the clinic tomorrow. 9 a.m. I walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, ignoring the curious glances from other diners. It wasn't until I reached my car that the trembling started, the delayed shock of what I'd just agreed to. I was going to try to save the child of the woman who had destroyed my life. The next morning, I arrived at the clinic an hour early, summoning Helen to my office immediately. "You're doing what?" she exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Ellie, are you sure about this? It sounds like emotional suicide." "What choice do I have?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "I can't turn away a child. Who needs our help, no matter who his mother is?" Helen sighed, sinking into the chair opposite my desk. "No, I suppose you can't. It's one of the reasons I love you. But right now, I kind of wish you were a bit more vindictive." That drew a small laugh from me, the first genuine one in days. "Trust me, the thought has crossed my mind." "So what's the plan? Full workup?" I nodded. "Complete reassessment, then if he's eligible, present the case to the protocol committee." "You know they'll approve it if you recommend it," Helen pointed out. "As co-director, your word carries weight." "I'm aware. That's why I need you to be in the room for every consultation, every decision. I need someone objective to make sure I'm being fair, to Jackson and to the program." Helen reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "I've got your back, Elle. Always have." At precisely 9 a.m., Victoria arrived with Jackson and, to my dismay, James. The boy was thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of chronic pain and poor sleep. But when he smiled at the reception nurse, I caught a glimpse of what James had described, a brightness that illness couldn't fully dim. I met them in the consultation room, Helen at my side. Jackson looked up at me with curious eyes. "Are you the doctor who's going to fix my head?" he asked directly, no preamble. I knelt to his level, ignoring his mother and James completely. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. I'm going to examine you today and see if we can help?" "Yes." He nodded seriously. "Mom says you're the best brain doctor in the whole city. Maybe the whole country." I glanced up at Victoria, surprised by the praise. Her face remained unreadable. "That's very kind," I said, turning back to Jackson. "But medicine is a team effort. I have excellent colleagues who work with me." The examination was thorough, but as gentle as I could make it. Jackson was clearly used to medical procedures, answering questions with a patient maturity that broke my heart. Throughout it all, Victoria hovered nearby, her anxiety palpable. James stood awkwardly by the door, clearly unsure of his place in this tableau. After the physical examination, we moved to imaging. The MRIs confirmed what I'd suspected. The tumor had grown substantially since his last scans, but it still presented a morphology that might respond to our treatment. Back in the consultation room, I explained what we'd found, keeping my language clinical, focusing solely on Jackson's care. "The good news is that Jackson appears to be a candidate for our protocol," I concluded. "The tumor's location and growth pattern match the parameters we've established for treatment eligibility." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "So you can help him?" "Potentially, yes. The protocol involves a combination of precisely targeted radiation and our proprietary immunotherapy drug. It's intensive, daily treatments for the first week, then 3 times weekly for a month. After that, we reassess and adjust as needed." "And the success rate?" James asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "In cases similar to Jackson's, we've seen tumor reduction in 83% of patients," Helen supplied. "Complete remission in 67%. Victoria covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping despite her efforts to contain it. Those are good odds. Much better than what we were told before." "The protocol has advanced significantly in the past 2 years," I explained. "We've refined the targeting and dosing, improved outcomes substantially." "What about side effects?" Victoria asked, recovering her composure. "Fatigue is common. Nausea, though we can manage that with medication. Hair loss from the radiation. Some patients experience temporary cognitive effects, memory issues, mood changes, but those typically resolve after treatment. Jackson, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Will it hurt? I turned to him, struck again by his directness. Some parts might be uncomfortable, I said honestly. But we'll do everything we can to make it easier for you. And if something hurts or feels wrong, you tell us right away, okay? He nodded solemnly. Okay. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping. And the cost? Is it still? The protocol committee will need to approve Jackson's inclusion, I interrupted. They meet tomorrow morning. Assuming they approve, and I expect they will, we could begin treatment as early as Thursday. That's wonderful, Victoria said. But about the cost, we can discuss financial arrangements later. I cut her off again, unwilling to have that conversation in front of Jackson. For now, let's focus on getting Jackson approved and prepared for treatment. After a few more questions, a nurse took Jackson to provide baseline blood samples, leaving the three of us adults alone in the consultation room. The atmosphere immediately thickened with tension. Thank you, Victoria said quietly. I know this can't be easy for you. As I said, I'm doing this for Jackson, not for you. James stepped forward. Ellie, can we talk privately, please? I looked at him, at the face that had once been my whole world, and felt nothing but a dull ache. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Victoria. I think we're beyond secrets now, don't you? He sighed, running a hand through his hair in that familiar gesture that used to endear him to me. I just want to make sure you're okay with all of this. I'm fine, I said flatly. I'm doing my job. And the financial aspect? Victoria pressed. You keep avoiding that topic. I fixed her with a cold stare. The protocol costs $320,000. Without insurance coverage, that would be due before treatment begins. Victoria paled. I can't. I know, I said simply. I've reviewed your financial records. Single mother, real estate agent, modest income, significant medical debt already. You can't afford it. How did you access my financial records? Victoria demanded, a flash of anger breaking through her careful composure. I didn't need to. Your previous application for financial assistance included all the relevant details. I gathered my notes, avoiding eye contact with either of them. The committee will make the final decision tomorrow. I'll call you with their answer. As I turned to leave, Victoria called after me. Eleanor, wait. Please. What are you going to recommend to the committee? I paused at the door, my back still to them. I'm going to recommend what's best for the patient, Victoria. That's all you need to know. With that, I walked out, my heart pounding in my chest. I had the power to save Jackson's life, or to deny him treatment. The power to punish Victoria for what she'd done to me, or to rise above it. The question was, what kind of doctor, what kind of person did I want to be? That evening, I sat alone in my home office, Jackson Chen's medical file spread across my desk. The MRI scans showed the tumor with brutal clarity, a spreading darkness at the base of his brainstem, pressing against the structures that controlled his most basic functions. Without intervention, it would eventually shut down his breathing, his heartbeat. I'd treated dozens of children with similar conditions, had developed our protocol specifically for cases that traditional medicine had deemed hopeless. In any other circumstance, my recommendation would be immediate and unequivocal, approved for treatment. But this wasn't any other circumstance. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Was I truly considering letting a child suffer, possibly die, because of what his mother had done? The thought made me sick, yet I couldn't deny the dark whisper in some corner of my mind. She deserves to feel the pain she's caused you. My phone rang, interrupting my spiral of thoughts. It was Helen. Have you made a decision? She asked without preamble. I'm still reviewing the case. Helen's sigh carried through the phone. No, you're not. You're torturing yourself with an ethical dilemma that shouldn't exist. The boy needs treatment. You're a doctor. End of story. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Helen insisted. Look, I hate Victoria Chen as much as you do. Probably more, because I've had to watch what she's done to my best friend. But her son is innocent in all this. I know that, I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. But it feels like she's winning. Again. She took my husband, and now she'll get her son's treatment. Treatment she can't possibly afford. This isn't about winning, Elle. It's about being the person I know you are, the doctor who founded a clinic specifically to help children other hospitals had given up on. I rubbed my temples, fighting against the tension headache building behind my eyes. What if this was her plan all along? To use James to get to me? To get Jackson into the program? Then she's a manipulative bitch who loves her son enough to destroy her karma for the next 7 lifetimes. Doesn't change what you should do, I laughed despite myself. When did you become the moral compass in this friendship? When you started considering options that the Ellie Mitchell I know would never actually take. Her voice softened. Get some sleep. We'll present to the committee in the morning, and you'll make the right call. You always do. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and carried it out to the back porch. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I thought about Jackson's eyes, so serious and intelligent, about the way he'd asked if the treatment would hurt, not if it would work, but if it would hurt. A child already so familiar with pain that he expected it, prepared for it. By the time I went to bed, my decision was made. The protocol committee convened at 8 a.m. in the clinic's main conference room. 7 people who would decide Jackson Chen's fate. Myself, Helen, 3 senior physicians from our staff, our head of research, and our financial officer. I presented the case clinically, detailing Jackson's diagnosis, the tumor's progression, and his eligibility for the treatment protocol. I made no mention of my personal connection to the case, though I suspected at least some of the committee. Members were aware of my situation. Seattle's medical community was small and gossip traveled fast. Based on the latest imaging and laboratory results, I concluded, patient JC presents as an excellent candidate for Protocol E27. I recommend approval for immediate inclusion. I felt Helen's eyes on me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She had never doubted my decision, even when I had. Dr. Marcus, our head of research, flipped through the file. Growth pattern is certainly consistent with our target parameters. Previous treatments? Standard radiation at Seattle Children's 2 years ago. Minimal effect. Current quality of life assessment? Declining, I said. Increased headaches? Some difficulty with fine motor control. Fatigue. Cognitive function remains intact, but he's missing significant school time. Dr. Patel, who had treated Jackson during his initial visit to our clinic, nodded thoughtfully. I remember this case. I'm surprised to see it return after so long. The mother recently became aware of our improved success rates, I explained, keeping my voice neutral. Our financial officer, Rebecca Wong, cleared her throat. Insurance denial still stands. Mother's financial situation appears unchanged from initial assessment. How do we propose covering the treatment costs? This was the moment. I had spent half the night considering my options, weighing my professional ethics against my personal pain. I'm recommending a full scholarship through the Evergreen Foundation, I said, referring to our clinic's nonprofit arm that occasionally covered costs for particularly promising cases. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. We currently have 3 patients on the waiting list for foundation support. What makes this case take priority? Urgency of intervention, optimal match to protocol parameters, and high probability of positive outcome, I recited. All true, all standard criteria for foundation support, though perhaps not the whole truth of my reasoning. And the foundation Has sufficient funds to cover this treatment without compromising our other cases? Rebecca pressed. I met her gaze steadily. Yes. I've already reviewed the numbers with accounting. What I didn't say was that I had spent part of the night transferring a significant amount of my personal savings into the Foundation's account, enough to cover Jackson's treatment and still leave room for the other pending cases. It wasn't technically improper, just unusual. A donation was a donation after all. After a few more questions, the committee voted unanimously to approve Jackson for the protocol, with treatment to begin the following day. Dr. Mitchell, Rebecca caught me as we were leaving the conference. Ramantio, that was quite a substantial personal contribution you made to the Foundation last night. I froze. You checked the donation records that closely? She smiled slightly. When they come in at 2 a.m. and match almost exactly the cost of a controversial treatment? Yes. Is there a problem? No problem. Just unusual. Consider it my commitment. To our mission? I said, starting to walk away. Eleanor, she called after me, her voice softer. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call, both personally and professionally. I nodded once, but didn't trust myself to respond. Back. In my office, I called Victoria with the news. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting with the phone in her hand. The committee has approved Jackson for the protocol, I said without preamble. Treatment will begin tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please ensure he doesn't eat after midnight. Tonight, and bring a complete list of his current medications. Her exhale was shaky. Thank you, Eleanor. We can't thank you enough. The Evergreen Foundation will cover the treatment costs, I continued, ignoring her gratitude. A social worker will meet with you tomorrow to handle the paperwork. A pause. The Foundation? I didn't apply for financial assistance this time. Submitted the application on Jackson's behalf. Standard procedure for cases with documented insurance denial. I see, she said slowly. And James mentioned something about a waiting list for Foundation support. How did Jackson qualify so quickly? I gripped the phone tighter. Of course James would know about our Foundation procedures. He'd attended enough fundraisers, listened to enough of my work stories over the years. Jackson's case is an optimal match for the protocol, with a high probability of positive outcome. The committee agreed unanimously. I see, she repeated, clearly not entirely convinced. Well, regardless of how it happened, we're grateful. Jackson is excited. Nervous, but excited. He says he wants to be a doctor like you someday. The comment struck me like a physical blow. In another life, under different circumstances, I might have mentored this bright, brave child, might have encouraged his interest in medicine, guided him toward a career saving others. That's a worthy ambition, I managed. I'll see you both tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond, before my professional facade could crack any further. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James and Victoria together, saw her hand resting on her pregnant belly, saw the future that should have been mine playing out with someone else in my role. Then I would see Jackson's serious eyes, his thin shoulders carrying a burden no child should have to bear, and the cycle of anger and compassion would begin again. By the time I arrived at the clinic the next morning, I was running on caffeine and determination alone. Helen took one look at me and steered me toward her office. You look like hell, she observed, closing the door behind us. Thanks. I hadn't noticed. Did you sleep at all? Not really. I sank into her visitor chair, suddenly exhausted. I keep thinking I've made the wrong decision. Helen perched on the edge of her desk. About treating Jackson? It was absolutely the right call. Not that. About. I gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. The foundation money, my involvement. In the case, all of it. Having second thoughts about using your own money? I shook my head. No, that I'm sure about. Jackson deserves the best treatment we can provide, regardless of his mother's actions or ability to pay. Then what's eating at you? I stared at my hands, unable to articulate the swirl of emotions clouding my judgment. I don't know if I can do this, Helen. See them day after day. Watch her get everything she wants while I lose everything. Helen's expression softened. You don't have to be Jackson's primary physician, you know. Any of our team could oversee his treatment. You've already done the hard part, getting him approved. The suggestion was tempting. A clean escape from the daily reminder of James's betrayal. And yet, no, I said finally. I need to see this through. I need to know that I didn't let my personal feelings interfere with his care, even indirectly. Helen studied me for a long moment. You're punishing yourself. For what? I'm not sure. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a message from reception. Victoria and Jackson had arrived. Showtime, I murmured, standing up and smoothing my lab coat. Helen caught my arm. You're a good person, Ellie. Better than most. Remember that when this gets hard. The first day of treatment went smoothly, almost too smoothly. Jackson was a model patient, following instructions perfectly, asking intelligent questions about each step of the process. Victoria remained subdued, grateful but cautious around me, as if sensing that one wrong word might shatter the fragile professional relationship we'd established. James didn't accompany them, a small mercy for which I was intensely grateful. By late afternoon, Jackson was settled in our observation suite, where he would remain overnight as we monitored his initial response to the immunotherapy component. I checked his vitals one last time, pleased to see everything within expected parameters. How are you feeling? I asked, noting the slight flush to his cheeks, a common reaction to the first treatment. A little hot, he admitted. And my head feels buzzy. Is that normal? Completely normal, I assured him. The medication is starting to work, teaching your immune system to recognize the tumor cells. The buzzing sensation should fade in a few hours. He nodded seriously. I thought it would hurt more. The pain usually comes later in the process, if at all, I explained. And if it does, we have excellent medications to help manage it. That's good. He paused, studying my face with a directness that reminded me he was more perceptive than most children his age. Dr. Mitchell, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to be my doctor the whole time I'm here? Or will it be different doctors like at my other hospital? I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I'll be overseeing your treatment throughout the protocol, yes, but you'll also work with several other excellent physicians on our team. He seemed satisfied with this answer. Good, I like you. You don't talk to me like I'm a baby. Despite everything, I smiled. You're clearly not a baby. You're a very brave young man. Mom says I'm brave too, he said, glancing at Victoria, who had stepped out into the hallway to make a phone call. But sometimes I see her crying when she thinks I'm asleep, and I don't feel very brave then. The simple observation hit me hard. Of course Victoria cried when her son couldn't see. Of course she was terrified of losing him. Whatever else she might be, homewrecker, manipulator, the woman who had stolen my husband, she was also a mother, fighting desperately for her child's life. It's okay to be scared sometimes, I told him. Even adults get scared, especially when someone they love is sick. Are you scared of anything, Dr. Mitchell? I thought about James, about the divorce, papers waiting on my lawyer's desk, about the empty house I returned to each night, about the baby Victoria was carrying, the child that should have been mine. Yes, I said softly. I get scared too. His eyes were already growing heavy with the sedative we'd administered to help him rest. Then you're brave too, he murmured. Checked his monitors one last time and quietly left the room, nearly colliding with Victoria in the hallway. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. I saw you talking to him. Everything is progressing exactly as expected, I assured her. Jackson is responding well to the initial treatment. He's resting now and should sleep through most of the night. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. Thank you for everything. I know this must be difficult. I'm just doing my job, I said, the familiar refrain feeling hollow even to my own ears. Victoria studied me, her head tilted slightly. You know, when I first realized who you were, when I connected that you were the Dr. Mitchell who had examined Jackson 2 years ago, I never imagined we'd end up here. I stiffened. And where exactly is here, Victoria? You saving my son's life while I'm carrying your husband's child? She said it bluntly, without artifice. It's not how I planned things. How did you plan things? I couldn't help asking. Morbid curiosity overriding my better judgment. When you decided to pursue James, knowing who he was, knowing who I was, she had the grace to look uncomfortable. I didn't have a grand plan, despite what you might think. I met James at a property showing. He mentioned his wife was a doctor. It wasn't until later, when I saw your photo in his wallet, that I recognized you. And yet you continued the affair. Yes? She met my gaze steadily. I continued the affair because I was falling in love with him, not because of who his wife was or what she might be able to do for Jackson someday. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect anything from you, Eleanor. You've already done more than I had any right to hope for. She rested her hand on her slightly rounded belly. But I want you to know that this baby wasn't part of some scheme. It just happened. The casual way she referred to her pregnancy, to the child James had always wanted, the child I had never been able to give him, rekindled my anger. Nothing just happens, Victoria. Certainly not 9-month affairs with married men. I stepped back, reclaiming my professional distance. The nursing staff will monitor Jackson overnight. If there are any concerns, they'll contact me immediately. You're welcome to stay in the suite with him. She reached out, catching my lab coat sleeve as I turned to leave. Eleanor, wait. There's something else you should know. I looked pointedly at her hand until she released my sleeve. What? James moved out last night. He's staying at a hotel. I frowned, confused by this unexpected information. Why would he leave your apartment? Because I asked him to. She held my gaze, her expression unreadable. After we left the clinic, yesterday he couldn't stop talking about you. How brilliant you are. How compassionate. How you were saving Jackson despite everything. And I realized. She trailed off, then continued more softly. I realized he's still in love with you. The statement hung in the air between us, neither accusation nor concession, simply fact. That's not my concern anymore, I said finally, though my heart had begun racing against my will. You're having his child. That's a connection that will outlast any feelings he might still have for me. Maybe, she acknowledged. But I won't be the woman who traps a man who loves someone else. I've done enough damage already. She hesitated, then added, He doesn't know I'm telling you this, and he doesn't know about the money. I froze. What money? The personal donation you made to cover Jackson's treatment. She smiled faintly at my surprise. I have friends in hospital administration. Word gets around. That information is supposed to be confidential. It is. My friend didn't give me specifics, just that an anonymous donor had made a large contribution that coincidentally matched Jackson's treatment costs. She shook her head slightly. It wasn't hard to figure out. I felt exposed. My private act of... what? Charity? Atonement? Whatever it was, I hadn't intended for Victoria to know. The foundation regularly receives donations for specific treatment purposes, I said stiffly. There's nothing unusual about it. You don't have to pretend with me, Eleanor. I know what you did, and I know why. You're a better person than I. I am a better person than I could ever hope to be. Before I could respond, my pager buzzed. a genuine emergency in another wing of the clinic. I have to go, I said, already turning away. The nurses will notify me if Jackson needs anything during the night. As I hurried toward the emergency, Victoria's words echoed in my mind. James moved out. He's still in love with you. You're a better person than I am. Was this another manipulation? Another calculated move in whatever game Victoria was playing? Or was it possible that she was genuinely backing away from James, recognizing the damage she had caused? And more disturbing, still, why did the thought of James still loving me stir emotions I had believed buried beneath my anger and hurt? These questions plagued me through the emergency, through the late-night rounds that followed, and into the early hours of the morning as I finally drove home to my empty house. As I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion weighing on me like a physical presence, I noticed a figure sitting on my front steps, James. He stood as I parked, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, looking as tired as I felt. I sat in my car for a long moment, considering simply backing out and driving away. But I couldn't run forever. Steeling myself, I got out of the car and approached the house, stopping a few feet away from him. It's 3 a.m., James. What are you doing? Here? He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, his face haggard in the harsh light of my porch lamp. I needed to see you, to talk to you, about everything. I'm too tired for this conversation, I said, moving to step past him. Please, Ellie. His voice cracked with emotion. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I paused, keys in hand, teetering, on the edge of a decision that felt momentous despite its simplicity. Let him speak, or send him away? In the silence of the pre-dawn darkness, with the weight of the past days pressing down on me, I made my choice. 5 minutes, I said, unlocking the front door. Then you're leaving. James followed me inside, his familiar footsteps on our hardwood floors sending an unwelcome pang through my chest. The house still smelled faintly of his cologne, as if the walls themselves held on to the memory of his presence. I set my keys on the entry table and turned to face him, arms crossed defensively. You wanted to talk. So talk. He ran a hand through, his disheveled hair, a nervous gesture I knew all too well. First, I want to thank you for what you're doing for Jackson. It's extraordinary. I'm not doing it for you. I know. That's what makes it extraordinary. He paused, his eyes searching my face. Victoria told me what you did, donating to the foundation to cover his treatment. I stiffened. She had no right to share that information. She thought I should know exactly what kind of woman I'd betrayed. His voice was soft, laced with regret. She moved out of her apartment today, said she couldn't keep doing this to you. This caught me off guard. She moved out? Where did she go? To her mother's place in Bellevue. He hesitated. She ended things between us. I laughed incredulously. She's 4 months pregnant with your child, James. You can't just end things. I know that, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. I'm not walking away from my responsibilities to the baby. But Victoria made it clear that our relationship was over. Said she wouldn't be part of keeping me from the woman I really love. The implication hung in the air between us. I turned away, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. Your 5 minutes are almost up. Ellie, please. I made the biggest mistake of my life. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I never stopped loving you. Even when I was with her, it was always you. That's not love, I said sharply, stepping back to restore the distance between us. That's selfishness. You wanted what she could give you that I couldn't. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. It wasn't about the baby. Not at first. Then what was it about? Help me understand, James, because from where I'm standing, you threw away 15 years of marriage for a woman you barely knew. I was lost, he admitted, his voice breaking. After your last miscarriage, when the doctors said we should stop trying, something inside me just broke. You threw yourself into work, into saving other people's children, and I was so proud of you for that. But I didn't know how to process my own grief. So you found comfort in another woman's bed? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. I found distraction, he corrected gently. And then it became more than that. Victoria was uncomplicated. She didn't carry all the history, all the pain that we did. He looked down at his hands. I know it's no excuse. There is no excuse. But I need you to know that it wasn't some grand romantic passion that took me away from you. It was weakness. My weakness. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. Why are you telling me this now? What do you expect to happen? I don't expect anything, he said. I just wanted you to know the truth and to tell you that I'm sorry. So incredibly sorry for the pain I've caused you. Your child will be born in 5 months, I reminded him, the words like acid on my tongue. You've created a family with her, whether you meant to or not. I know. He nodded solemnly. And I'll be there for my child, always. But Victoria and I both agree that trying to build a relationship on the foundation of what we did to you would be wrong. It was wrong from the start. I studied his face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only sincerity and regret. Your 5 minutes are up, I said finally. He nodded, accepting the dismissal, and moved toward the door. Then he paused, turning back to me. You know, watching you with Jackson today, I was reminded of all the reasons I fell in love with you in the first place. Your compassion, your brilliance, your strength. You're saving that boy's life, Ellie, despite everything his mother did to you. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I want you to know that I see you, truly see you, and I am in awe of the woman you are. With that, he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. I stood frozen in the entryway, his words echoing in my mind. After a long moment, I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and finally allowed the tears to come. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of clinic work and Jackson's treatments. The boy responded remarkably well to the protocol, his tumor already showing signs of regression by the end of the first week. His energy improved, the headaches decreased, and his neurological function stabilized. Victoria brought him to every appointment, but she was subdued, almost deferential in my presence. She asked intelligent questions about his treatment, followed all instructions to the letter, but never mentioned James or her pregnancy or the strange conversation we'd had that night in the hospital. I maintained my professional distance, focusing solely on Jackson's care. But the boy himself made such detachment increasingly difficult. He was endlessly curious about the treatments, about medicine in general, about my work. During his longer sessions, he would pepper me with questions that betrayed both his intelligence and his fundamental sweetness. Dr. Mitchell, he asked one afternoon as the immunotherapy drugs dripped into his veins, do you think I could be a doctor someday, even though I've been sick? I think you could be anything you want to be, I told him honestly. Many doctors choose their specialty because of their own experiences with illness. He considered this thoughtfully. If I become a doctor, I want to help kids like me, kids who have scary things in their brains. That's a wonderful goal. I checked his IV line, noting the steady drip. It takes many years of training, but you certainly have the curiosity for it. Mom says I'm too curious sometimes. He glanced at Victoria, who had stepped out to take a phone call. She says I ask too many questions. There's no such thing as too many questions in medicine, I assured him. Good doctors are always curious. He smiled, revealing the gap where he'd recently lost a tooth, a normal childhood milestone that seemed miraculous given what his body was fighting. That's what I told her, but she still gets mad when I ask about certain things. What kinds of things? His expression grew more serious. About my dad, about the new baby, about why we had to leave our apartment. I froze, uncomfortable with the turn in conversation, but unwilling to shut down his trust. Those are complicated adult matters, Jackson. Sometimes parents need time to figure out how to explain difficult things. I know she and James aren't together anymore, he said matter-of-factly. He used to come over all the time, and now he doesn't. But he still calls me every day to see how I'm feeling. I wasn't sure how to respond to this, but was saved by Victoria's return. Seeing us in conversation, she raised an eyebrow questioningly. Jackson was just telling me he might want to be a doctor someday, I explained, carefully neutral. Victoria smiled, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. He's been saying that since his first MRI. Something about the big machines fascinated him. They're like spaceships, Jackson explained earnestly. And they can see inside your body without cutting you open. That's amazing. I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. It is pretty amazing. After completing Jackson's treatment for the day, I retreated to my office to catch up on paperwork. I had just settled in when there was a knock at my door. Come in, I called, expecting Helen or one of the nurses. To my surprise, Victoria entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Do you have a moment, Dr. Mitchell? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Is everything all right with Jackson? Yes, he's fine. Resting in the observation room. She sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I wanted to talk to you about what happens next. The protocol continues for another 3 weeks, at which point we'll do a comprehensive reassessment, I explained, slipping into clinical mode. Based on the results, we'll either continue with the current regimen or adjust as needed. That's not what I meant. She met my gaze directly. I meant what happens with James, with us, with this whole situation. I tensed. That's not a professional conversation, Victoria. I know, she sighed. But I think it's one we need to have. Woman to woman, not doctor to patient's mother. I wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful boundary I'd established. But curiosity and a strange sense that this conversation was inevitable won out. Fine. What did you want to discuss? James told me he came to see you a couple of weeks ago. She didn't wait for my confirmation before continuing. I need you to know that I was the one who encouraged him to do that, to tell you the truth. Why would you do that? She looked down at her hands, at the slight swell of her belly visible beneath her sweater. Because I realized something the day you agreed to treat Jackson. Something I should have seen much sooner. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I didn't target James because he was your husband, not consciously. But I did pursue him, knowing he was married, knowing he belonged to someone else. And I did it because I was drowning in grief and fear over Jackson. And James was kind, strong, stable. Everything I needed and wasn't finding in my own life. I remained silent, letting her speak without interruption. When I found out who you were, that you were the same Dr. Mitchell who had examined Jackson, I told myself it was a sign, that somehow the universe had brought James into my life to eventually save my son. She laughed bitterly. I actually convinced myself that destroying your marriage was somehow justified, because in the end it would lead to Jackson's treatment. That's quite a rationalization, I said coldly. Yes, it was. She met my gaze unflinchingly. But when you agreed to treat Jackson anyway, when you donated your own money to make it happen, after everything I'd done to you, I couldn't maintain that delusion anymore. I saw clearly what I had become, someone so desperate to save her, child that she was willing to destroy another person's life to do it. I was struck by her self-awareness, unexpected and disarming in its frankness. Jackson is what matters now, I said finally. His treatment, his recovery. The rest is complicated. It is, she agreed. But there's one more thing you should know. Something I haven't told James yet. She took a deep breath. I'm not keeping the baby. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. What? I'm giving the baby up for adoption, she clarified. I've already spoken with an agency, and they have a couple. A wonderful couple who've been waiting for years to adopt. Her voice softened. They can't have children naturally. The wife has a condition similar to yours. The revelation stunned me into silence. My mind raced through the implications, the questions, the sheer unexpected weight of what she was telling me. Does James know? I finally managed. She shook her head. Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. Why? Because I've taken enough from you. Her eyes filled with tears. This baby should have been yours, Eleanor. If life were fair, if I hadn't interfered, you and James would have found your way to parenthood somehow. Maybe through adoption, like I'm choosing now. I struggled to process her words, to reconcile this vulnerable, remorseful woman with the calculating one who had laughed at my tears weeks ago. What do you expect me to say to this? I asked quietly. Nothing. I don't expect anything. I just thought you deserved to know before James did. She stood up, suddenly businesslike again. I should get back to Jackson. He'll be wanting his tablet when he wakes up. She was almost to the door when I found my voice again. Victoria. She paused, turning back. Yes? Why did you laugh that day at my house when I was crying? Why did you laugh? Her face crumpled slightly, genuine shame washing over her features. Because I was terrified. Terrified that you wouldn't help Jackson, that you'd turn us away out of justified hatred for me. Laughing was a defense, a way to seem in control, when I was anything but. She swallowed hard. It was cruel and unforgivable. I'm sorry. With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. I sat at my desk for a long time afterward, staring unseeing at the paperwork before me, my mind whirling with the implications of what Victoria had shared. Her remorse seemed genuine. Her decision to give up the baby for adoption, unexpected and strangely poignant. And somewhere, in a corner of my heart I'd thought permanently closed off, a small flicker of something that felt dangerously like forgiveness began to glow. 3 more. Weeks passed. Jackson continued to respond exceptionally well to the treatment, his tumor shrinking by nearly 60%, well above our expectations for this stage of the protocol. His energy improved, his headaches vanished, and his prognosis shifted from months to years, possibly decades. Victoria remained reserved but appreciative, never missing an appointment, never complaining about the grueling schedule or the side effects Jackson sometimes experienced. And she never again mentioned our conversation about the baby, about James, about her plans for the future. I found myself watching her sometimes, this woman who had nearly destroyed my life, now sitting patiently beside her son's hospital bed, reading to him when he was too tired to hold his own book, massaging his thin shoulders when the medication made them ache. She was a devoted mother, that much was undeniable. One afternoon, as I was completing Jackson's weekly assessment, my phone buzzed with a text from Helen. James is in the lobby. Says he needs to speak with you urgently. Should I send him away? I stared at the message, my heart rate accelerating. James hadn't attempted to contact me since that night at my house. What could be so urgent now? Everything okay? Jackson asked, noticing my distraction. Yes, just a message from a colleague. I finished my examination, making notes in his chart. You're doing exceptionally well, Jackson. Your latest scans show significant improvement. He beamed. Does that mean I can go back to school soon? Let's take it one step at a time, I cautioned. But yes, If things continue at this rate, we might be able to discuss a modified school schedule in the near future. Victoria, who had been quietly observing, from the corner spoke up. That would mean the world to him. He misses his friends. I nodded, then made a decision. Would you excuse me for a moment? There's something I need to address. I'll be right back. In the hallway, I texted Helen back. Send him to my office. I'll be there in 5 minutes. When I entered my office a few minutes later, James was standing by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. He turned when he heard the door, and I was struck by how tired he looked. Deep shadows under his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. "Ellie," he said, his voice relieved. "Thank you for seeing me." "You said it was urgent." I remained by the door, maintaining distance between us. "What's going on?" He ran a hand through his hair. "Victoria told me about the baby, about her plans for adoption." "Ah, so that was it." "When?" "Last night. She said she'd already spoken to an agency, that she'd found a couple who can't have children of their own." He shook his head, bewilderment clear in his expression. "She also said she told you first." "Why would she do that?" "I think she was trying to make amends in her way." I moved to my desk, kneading the barrier between us. "How do you feel about her decision?" He sank into the visitor chair, suddenly looking even more exhausted. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me is devastated. This is my child we're talking about, possibly the only biological child I'll ever have." He met my gaze directly. "But another part of me understands. Victoria is focused entirely on Jackson's recovery. And after what we did to you, maybe bringing this child into such a complicated situation would be selfish. It's not about me, James. This is between you and Victoria. That's just it. It is about you. At least partly." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Victoria seems to think that by giving up the baby, she's somehow, I don't know, making space for the possibility of us reconciling." I stared at him, genuinely shocked. "She said that?" "Not in those exact words. But she made it clear that she believes I still love you, that what we had was a mistake born of grief and fear, and that by stepping aside completely, no shared custody, no co-parenting complications, she's removing the final obstacle between us." I didn't know how to respond to this. The idea that Victoria Chen, the woman who had laughed at my tears, who had demanded my house, who had stolen my husband, was now actively trying to reunite us, was so absurd it bordered on surreal. "What do you want, James?" I asked finally. "I want—" He trailed off, then started again. "I want to know if there's any chance for us. Any chance at all. Because if there is, I'll support Victoria's decision. But if there isn't—" He swallowed. Hard. "If there isn't, then I need to fight for my right to be this child's father, even if Victoria gives up her parental rights." The weight of his words settled around me like a physical presence. He was putting the decision in my hands, whether he would be a father to this child or whether he would try to repair our broken marriage. "That's not fair," I said softly. "You can't make me responsible for that choice." "I know it's not fair." "None of this is fair." His voice broke slightly. "But I need to know, Ellie. Do you think you could ever forgive me? Could we ever find our way back to each other?" I closed my eyes, searching my heart for the truth. The betrayal still cut deep. The image of them together, Victoria's cruel laughter, the weeks of loneliness and anger that followed. But alongside, that pain was 15 years of love, of partnership, of building a life together. And beneath it all, the undeniable fact that I had never stopped loving him, even when I hated what he had done. "I don't know," I admitted finally, opening my eyes to meet his gaze. "I honestly don't know if forgiveness is possible. But I do know that making a decision about your child based on what might happen between us would be wrong. That baby deserves better than to be a bargaining chip or a sacrifice. James nodded slowly, absorbing my words. You're right. Of course you're right. He stood up, straightening his shoulders. I should let you get back to your patients. Thank you for seeing me. As he reached the door, I spoke again. James, he turned. Yes? Whatever you decide about the baby, I think you should know that. I'm starting to understand how something like this could happen, how pain and fear can drive people to make devastating choices. I took a deep breath. I'm not saying I forgive you, but I'm starting to see a path to a place where I might. Hope flickered in his eyes, cautious but unmistakable. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, I acknowledged. But it's where I am. After he left, I remained at my desk, staring at the door long after it had closed behind him. The conversation replayed in my mind, along with Victoria's confession, Jackson's progress, the tangled web of pain and healing that had brought us, all to this point. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt something other than anger or grief. I felt possibility, fragile and uncertain, but real. I stood up, straightening my lab coat, and headed back to the treatment room where Jackson waited. One step at a time, I reminded myself. Just like the treatment protocol, healing happened in stages, with setbacks and progress intermingled, with patience and careful attention to symptoms. And just like Jackson's prognosis, my own future suddenly seemed to hold more promise than I had dared to hope. The following Monday brought a milestone in Jackson's treatment, his midpoint evaluation. After 6 weeks of intensive therapy, we would conduct a comprehensive assessment to determine the protocol's efficacy and map out the next phase of treatment. I arrived at the clinic earlier than usual, reviewing his file one last time before the battery of tests began. The preliminary data was encouraging. Blood markers trending in the right direction, physical symptoms in retreat, neurological function stabilizing. But the MRI would tell the true story of what was happening in Jackson's brain. Helen knocked on my office door just as I finished my notes. Big day, she said, settling into the chair across from me. How's our star patient doing? All indicators point to significant improvement, but we'll know more after the imaging. I closed the file, meeting my friend's gaze. And, before you ask, yes, I'm fine, professionally and personally. Helen raised an eyebrow. I wasn't going to ask, but since you brought it up, how are things on the personal front? Any more middle-of-the-night visits from James? I sighed. He came by the clinic last week. Victoria told him about her plans to give the baby up for adoption. She's what? Helen's eyes widened. That's unexpected. That's one word for it. I briefly recounted my conversations with both Victoria and James, watching Helen's expression shift from surprise to cautious hope. So what are you thinking? She asked when I finished. About James? About all of it? I shook my head slightly. I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks this is just another manipulation, Victoria's way of seeming noble while actually orchestrating exactly what she wants. And what would that be? I'm not sure. Maybe she realizes James still has feelings for me, so she's positioning herself as the selfless martyr, knowing I'll be more likely to help Jackson if I don't see her as the enemy. Helen considered this. That's pretty Machiavellian. Do you really think she's that calculating? I don't know what to think anymore. I stood, needing to move. Every time I think I understand what's happening, the ground shifts beneath my feet. What? Does your gut tell you? About Victoria's sincerity? I paused, remembering Victoria's face when she spoke about her decision. The mix of resignation and resolve, the absence of the calculation I'd come to expect from her. I think she might actually be sincere, I admitted, which makes everything infinitely more complicated. Helen stood as well, squeezing my shoulder gently. Life rarely gives us clean, simple narratives, Elle. Sometimes the villains in our stories turn out to be just people, flawed, desperate people who made terrible choices. And what about the heroes? I asked wryly. What do they turn out to be? Also just people, Helen replied with a small smile. Flawed people trying their best to do the right thing in impossible situations. Before I could respond, my pager buzzed. Jackson had arrived for his evaluation. The MRI suite hummed with the familiar mechanical whir as Jackson lay perfectly still inside the machine. I watched through the observation window as the images began to form on the monitor, cross-sections of his brain appearing slice by slice, the tumor at his brainstem coming into focus. Dr. Patel stood beside me, studying the images with practiced eyes. Remarkable regression, he murmured, pointing to the screen. Look at the margins, much clearer definition than in the baseline scan, and the surrounding tissue shows significantly reduced inflammation. I nodded, relief washing through me. The protocol is working even better than expected. I'd estimate at least 65% reduction in tumor mass, Dr. Patel continued. If this trend continues, we might see complete remission within another 2 months. Complete remission. The word sent a surge of professional satisfaction through me. This was why I had founded the clinic, why I had dedicated my life to pediatric neurology, for moments like this, when science and medicine combined to snatch a child back from the brink. After the MRI, we conducted a series of neurological assessments. Jackson's coordination had improved dramatically, his reflexes were normalizing, and his cognitive tests showed no deficits whatsoever. The boy who had come to us with mere months to live now had every chance at a full, healthy life. Victoria waited anxiously in the consultation room, rising to her feet when Jackson and I entered. Her face was tense, braced for news, good or bad. Dr. Mitchell says I'm doing awesome, Jackson announced before I could speak, his face alight with excitement. She says the monster in my brain is shrinking. Victoria's eyes darted to mine, seeking confirmation. Is that true? The tumor is shrinking? Substantially, I confirmed, unable to keep the smile from my face. The treatment is working remarkably well. The tumor has decreased by approximately 65%, and all neurological indicators are trending positively. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. Jackson, sensing his mother's emotion, wrapped his thin arms around her waist. Don't cry, Mom. Dr. Mitchell says crying is just for when you're sad. I knelt to his level. Actually, Jackson, sometimes people cry when they're very happy or relieved. I think your mom is feeling both of those things right now. He considered this thoughtfully. So they're good tears? The best kind, Victoria confirmed, wiping her eyes and pulling him close. I cleared my throat, giving them a moment before continuing. We'll need to adjust the protocol slightly moving forward, reducing the radiation component while maintaining the immunotherapy dosage. This should minimize side effects while continuing to target the remaining tumor cells. Victoria nodded, composing herself. What's the long-term prognosis now? If the current trajectory continues, we're looking at a very good chance of complete remission, I said, the words still thrilling even after delivering similar news to dozens of families over the years. Of course, Jackson will require regular monitoring for the next several years, but the outlook is extremely positive. Victoria's breath caught, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I never thought, when they first diagnosed him, they told me to prepare for the worst. Well, it seems Jackson had other plans, I said, smiling at the boy who was now examining his own MRI images with fascination. Look, Mom, he exclaimed, pointing to the screen. That's my brain. And see that dark spot? That's the monster, but it's way smaller than before. Victoria moved to his side, listening intently as he proudly explained what he'd learned about his own condition, medical terminology mingled with a child's concrete understanding of illness and healing. I watched them together, this mother and son united against an enemy they were finally defeating, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Professional satisfaction, certainly, but also something deeper, more personal. A softening toward Victoria that I hadn't expected and wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Dr. Mitchell," Jackson called, interrupting my thoughts. "When I grow up and become a doctor like you, will you teach me how to use the big machines?" "I'd be happy to," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. "You'll make an excellent doctor someday." After discussing the next steps in his treatment plan, I left them to process the good news, retreating to my office to complete my notes. I had just finished when there was a soft knock at my door. "Come in," I called, expecting Helen or one of the nurses. Instead, Victoria entered, alone. "Do you have a minute?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the personal undercurrents that now ran between us. "Where's Jackson?" "With the art therapist. They're making celebration cards for everyone who's helped with his treatment." She settled into the chair, her hands resting on her swollen belly, a visible reminder of everything that stood between us. "I needed to thank you, properly. What you've done for Jackson, there are no words adequate enough." "I'm his doctor," I said simply. "This is what we do here." "No." She shook her head firmly. "Don't diminish this. We both know you've gone far beyond professional obligation. You've saved my son's life despite having every reason to turn us away." I didn't know how to respond to her gratitude, so I changed the subject. "Have you told James about today's results?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first." She hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking about what happens after Jackson's treatment is complete. About the future." "In what sense?" "In every sense." She met my gaze directly. "Eleanor, I'm leaving Seattle. As soon as Jackson is stable enough to travel, we're moving to Portland. My sister lives there. She's offered us a place to stay until I can find work." This was unexpected. "What about the adoption? Your arrangement with James?" "The adoption is still happening. I've met with the couple several times. They're wonderful people. Kind, stable, desperate for a child." Her expression softened. "The wife has the same condition you do. They've been trying for 8 years. I felt a strange pang at the similarity, at the thought of this unknown woman who shared my struggle. "And James? How does he feel about you moving away?" "He doesn't know yet, but I think it's for the best." She looked down at her hands. "As long as I'm here, I'm a reminder of what happened, of the pain I caused. You both deserve the chance to heal without that constant reminder." "You make it sound so simple," I said, struggling to understand her motivation. "As if your leaving solves everything." "Not everything," she acknowledged. "But it removes a complication. James can visit Jackson whenever he wants. I would never keep them apart. But this way, there's a clean separation. A new chapter for everyone." A thought occurred to me. Does this have anything to do with Jackson's improved prognosis? Now that he's likely to recover, you don't need to stay near the clinic. Victoria flinched slightly at the implication. "That's not fair. I'm grateful beyond words for what you've done, but my decision isn't about abandoning Jackson's care. It's about giving all of us, you, James, Jackson, myself, the space to move forward." "And the baby?" I asked, my eyes dropping to her belly. "The adoptive parents live in Bellevue. They've offered to keep in touch, to send updates and photos, if I want them." Her voice trembled slightly. "I haven't decided yet if that would make it easier or harder." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of empathy for her. To carry a child for 9 months and then let it go, even knowing it was going to a loving home, required a kind of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "Why are you telling me all this?" I asked finally. Victoria stood, moving to the window that overlooked the Seattle skyline. Because I owe you the truth. And because... She turned back to face me. Because I think James still loves you. I think there might be a chance for you two to rebuild what I helped destroy. But that won't happen with me here, standing between... you. The frankness of her statement caught me off guard. That's not your decision to make, or mine for that matter. James has to decide what he wants. He already knows what he wants, she said softly. He wants you. He always has. I was just a detour, a mistake born of grief and fear and weakness. Her words echoed what James himself had told me, creating an unsettling sense that perhaps they were right, that the affair had been less about love and more about escape from the pain that had engulfed our marriage. I should get back to Jackson, Victoria said, moving toward the door. I just wanted you to know my plans and to thank you again for everything. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my office, trying to process the latest turn in this increasingly complex situation. Victoria leaving Seattle. Jackson's treatment succeeding beyond expectations. The baby being adopted by a couple who couldn't conceive naturally. And James, still there, still waiting, still hoping for forgiveness. I wasn't. Sure I could give. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Heard the good news about Jackson. Incredible work, Ellie. Any chance we could talk later? I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back, my place, 7 p.m. I spent the rest of the day in a state of heightened awareness, my mind constantly returning to the evening ahead while I tried to focus on my remaining patients. By the time I pulled into my driveway at 6:30, my nerves were wound tight with anticipation and uncertainty. I changed out of my work clothes into jeans and a soft sweater, deliberately casual, deliberately not trying too hard. Then, I paced my living room, rehearsing what I might say, how I might respond to whatever James had come to discuss. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. James stood on the porch, a bottle of wine in one hand and a familiar paper bag in the other, takeout from the Thai restaurant we'd frequented throughout our marriage. I brought dinner, he said, a tentative smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I thought you might not have eaten yet. I hadn't, though food had been the furthest thing from my mind. Still, the thoughtfulness of the gesture, remembering my favorite dish, knowing I often forgot to eat on busy clinic days, stirred something in me. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We settled at the kitchen counter, falling into a routine so familiar it felt like muscle memory, James unpacking. The food while I fetched plates and glasses, the choreography of 15 years together making itself known in the smallest of movements. Victoria told me about Jackson's results, he said as we began to eat. It's remarkable, Ellie. The work you're doing there. It's nothing short of miraculous. Hardly a miracle, I demurred. Just science, applied with precision. Don't downplay it. You've given that boy his life back. He studied my face, his expression softening. It's what always amazed me about you. Your ability to separate the personal from the professional, to help someone who had every reason to hate. I set down my fork, suddenly not hungry. Is that why you're here? To compliment my professional ethics? He shook his head. No. I'm here because Victoria told me she's leaving Seattle, that she's giving the baby up for adoption and moving to Portland with Jackson as soon as his treatment allows. She told me the same thing today. And what? Do you think about it? I considered the question, choosing my words carefully. I think she believes she's doing the right thing, creating space for everyone to heal. Is that what you want? His voice was quiet, hesitant. Space to heal? I don't know what I want. James. I met his gaze directly. Everything has happened so fast. Your affair, the pregnancy, Jackson's illness and treatment, now Victoria's decision to leave. I haven't had time to process any of it, let alone decide what I want for the future. He nodded, accepting this. That's fair, He paused, then continued more softly. I just need to know if there's any chance for us. Any possibility that someday you might be able to forgive me. The question hung between us, heavy with implications. I thought about the past weeks. The pain of betrayal, the complexity of treating Jackson, the unexpected turn toward understanding, if not quite forgiveness. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me thinks what happened broke something essential between us, something that can't be repaired. But another part? I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. Another part remembers the 15 years before all this, the life we built together, the love that I've never quite managed to stop feeling, even when I wanted to. Hope flickered in his eyes, cautious but unmistakable. That's more than I dared to hope for. It's not a promise, I warned. It's just an acknowledgement that things aren't as black and white as they seemed at first. I understand. He reached across the counter, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his skin. I know I have no right to ask for another chance. But if you're willing to try, even just to talk, to see where things stand between us, I'll wait as long as it takes. The sincerity in his voice, the familiar intensity of his gaze, sent a flutter of something through me. Not quite desire, not quite forgiveness, but something adjacent to both. What about the baby? I asked, the question that had been hovering at the edges of our conversation. Are you really okay with the adoption? His expression grew more somber. I've met the couple. They're good people, stable, loving, desperate for a child, the kind of parents every child deserves. He swallowed hard. It's not what I would have chosen, but I understand Victoria's reasoning, and part of me thinks, maybe this is how it should be. A fresh start for everyone, including the baby. But it's your child, I pressed, needing to understand. Your biological child. After everything we went through trying to have a baby of our own. Can you really just let it go? That's the hardest part, he admitted, pain evident in his voice. But I keep thinking about what you said, that the baby shouldn't be a bargaining chip or a sacrifice. And if I fought for custody, that's exactly what it would become. A constant reminder of my betrayal, a living symbol of the worst mistake I've ever made. His words hung in the air between us, raw with honesty and regret. The adoptive mother, I said after a moment. Victoria mentioned she has the same condition I do. James nodded. Yes, they've been trying for years, with the same heartbreak we experienced. When Victoria told me that, it felt, I don't know, like the universe offering some kind of cosmic balance, a chance for some good to come from all this pain. I wasn't sure I believed in that kind of cosmic justice, but the symmetry was undeniable. My husband's child going to a woman who shared my inability to carry a pregnancy to term. There was a poetic irony to it that might have been beautiful, if it weren't so painful. I need time, I said finally. Time to think, to process everything that's happened, to figure out if there's a path forward for us. Of course, he agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. We finished our meal in a more comfortable silence, the air between us cleared somewhat by our honesty. When James finally left, he didn't try to kiss me, didn't push for more than I was ready to give. He simply thanked me for hearing him out, for being willing to consider the possibility of reconciliation. Standing in my doorway, watching him walk to his car, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of the crushing weight that had pressed on my chest since discovering his affair. It was as if, after weeks of storm, the atmospheric pressure had finally begun to normalize. allowing me to breathe more freely again. Whether that meant forgiveness was possible, whether our marriage could be rebuilt on the ashes of betrayal, I still didn't know. But for the first time, I could imagine asking those questions without being overwhelmed by pain and anger, and for tonight, that felt like enough. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm to my life that was both new and strangely familiar. At the clinic, Jackson continued to improve, his tumor shrinking steadily under our treatment protocol. His energy returned in bursts, his body recovering from the assault of both disease and therapy. We adjusted his regimen as needed, balancing efficacy against side effects, always mindful of the delicate brain tissue we were fighting to protect. Victoria remained a constant presence during his treatments, her pregnancy now visibly advanced. She never mentioned James or the adoption during these visits, focusing entirely on Jackson's care. Our interactions were cordial, professional, the history between us acknowledged but set aside for the sake of her son. Outside the clinic, James and I began a tentative reconnection. Coffee once a week became dinner twice a week, conversations that started carefully neutral, gradually deepening to address the wounds we'd both sustained. We moved slowly, deliberately, neither of us wanting to rush into reconciliation without properly processing what had happened. "I've started seeing a therapist," James told me one evening as we walked along the waterfront after dinner, "to understand why I made the choices I did." "What have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious. He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. That I never properly grieved our losses, the miscarriages, the failed treatments, the final diagnosis that we couldn't have children. I just pushed it all down, tried to be strong for you. I nodded, remembering how he'd held me through each devastation, never showing his own pain. "I always wondered how you stayed so calm." I wasn't calm. I was frozen. His voice caught slightly. "And then when you threw yourself into the clinic, into saving other people's children, I felt left behind somehow. Like you'd found a way to move forward, and I was still stuck in this pit of grief I couldn't acknowledge." We stopped at a railing overlooking the sound, the city lights reflecting on the dark water. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. "Because I was ashamed. What right did I have to fall apart when you were the one physically experiencing the losses? It felt selfish somehow." He turned to face me, his expression raw with honesty. "That's what my therapist is helping me see. That by not dealing with my grief, by pushing it down and pretending to be fine, I created this vulnerability. This empty space that Victoria somehow filled, temporarily." I considered his words, recognizing the truth in them. We had both retreated from our shared pain, me into my work, him into stoic silence, creating a distance neither of us had acknowledged, until it was too late. "I'm seeing someone too," I admitted. "A grief counselor, actually. She's helping me understand that I never properly mourned either. I just converted my pain into professional purpose." James nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. We were so busy trying to protect each other that we ended up isolated, even while living in the same house. It was a painful realization, but also oddly freeing. The recognition that what had happened between us wasn't simply about James's weakness or Victoria's manipulation, but about patterns we had both participated in creating. "Do you think we can find our way back?" he asked, the question hanging in the cool evening air between us. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I think we owe it to ourselves, and to the 15 years we shared, to try." That night, for the first time since discovering his affair, I let James kiss me goodnight. It was brief, gentle, more promise than passion, but it felt like a beginning. 2 weeks later, Jackson's MRI showed what we'd all been hoping for. The tumor had shrunk by over 80%, with clear margins appearing between the growth and the critical. brain structures it had once threatened. His blood work showed normal markers, his neurological function had returned to baseline, and his energy was that of a typical 7-year-old boy. "So what does this mean?" Victoria asked as we reviewed the results in my office. Jackson busy with a puzzle in the playroom down the hall. Is he going to be okay?" "We need to continue the protocol for another 4 weeks to ensure we've targeted all the malignant cells," I explained. "But yes, barring any unexpected complications, Jackson should make a full recovery. We'll need to monitor him with quarterly scans for the first year, then biannually for several years. But the prognosis is excellent." Victoria's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never thought. When they first diagnosed him, they told me to prepare for the worst. They said there was nothing they could do." "Medicine advances quickly," I said, my professional demeanor softening in the face of her emotion. "What wasn't possible 2 years ago is standard protocol now." "It's not just medicine," she insisted, wiping her eyes. "It's you, Eleanor. What you did for Jackson, for us, despite everything. I don't know how I can ever repay you." I felt a strange discomfort at her gratitude, still not entirely reconciled to the idea of accepting thanks from the woman who had nearly destroyed my life. "Jackson did all the hard work. He's remarkably resilient." "Like his doctor," Victoria said with a small smile. Then, more hesitantly, "Have you and James been talking?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes. We've been working through things." She nodded, seeming genuinely pleased. "Good. That's good." She rested her hand on her swollen belly, now nearly 8 months along. "I met with the adoptive parents again yesterday. They're painting the nursery green. Gender neutral, but still warm," they said. I wasn't sure how to respond to this, caught between my lingering resentment and a growing reluctant empathy for her situation. "The adoption papers are all drafted," she continued, filling the silence. "They've been incredibly understanding. About my requests, open communication, annual updates, that sort of thing." "And James? Is he comfortable with the arrangement?" "He's been amazing, actually. Met with them several times. Answered all their questions about his family medical history." She looked down at her hands. "They've suggested he could have a role in the child's life if he wants. Not as a parent, but as a sort of honorary uncle. Someone who's present but not primary." The thought of James maintaining a connection to the child created a complicated twist of emotion in my chest. "How do you feel about that?" "I think it's healthy," she said after a moment's consideration. "Better for the child to know where they came from, to have those connections, than to wonder later in life." I nodded, understanding the logic even as I wondered how such an arrangement would affect my own relationship with James, should we find our way back to each other. "When do you leave for Portland?" I asked, changing the subject. "Once Jackson completes the treatment protocol. My sister has a guest house on her property. It's small, but it's a place to start over." She hesitated, then added, "Jackson talks about you all the time, you know. Wants to be Dr. Mitchell when he grows up." Despite everything, I smiled at this. He'd make an excellent doctor. He has the curiosity for it, and the courage. Would it be all right if he wrote to you sometimes? Sent you his science projects, that sort of thing? He'd be devastated to lose contact with you completely. The request touched something in me I hadn't expected, a genuine attachment to this bright, brave child who had endured so much. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "I'd like that." As Victoria left my office, I felt the strange sense that something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of peace. A mutual recognition of the complex web of pain and healing that had brought us to this point. The baby was born on a rainy Tuesday in early October, 3 weeks before Victoria's due date, but healthy nonetheless. I learned about it from James, who called me from the hospital, his voice a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite parse. "A girl," he said. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Victoria's doing well. The adoptive parents are here. They're over the moon. That's good, I managed, unsure how to respond to this news that connected us all in such complicated ways. Would you, he hesitated, would you want to come to the hospital? To meet her before she goes home with her new family? The request stunned me into momentary silence. Meet the child that had been conceived during my husband's affair? The baby that symbolized everything that had gone wrong in our marriage? I don't think that would be appropriate, James. I understand, he said quickly. I just thought, never mind, it was a bad idea. But after we hung up, the thought lingered. The baby, this innocent child who had entered the world through no fault of her own, would soon leave the hospital with parents who had struggled with infertility, who had longed for a child just as James and I once had. There was a symmetry to it that felt almost like grace, a redemptive thread running through the tapestry of pain we had all woven together. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my keys and drove to the hospital. I found James in the waiting area, outside the maternity ward, his face lighting up with surprise when he saw me. "Ellie," he said, standing quickly, "you came." I surprised myself, I admitted. Is it all right if I see her?" He nodded, leading me down the corridor to the nursery window. Through the glass, rows of newborns in clear bassinets slept or squirmed under the watchful eyes of nurses. James pointed to one in the front row, a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, dark hair visible against the hospital-issue cap. "That's her," he said softly. "Charlotte." The adoptive parents chose the name. I studied the infant's face, searching for traces of James, of Victoria, of the complicated circumstances that had brought her into the world. But all I saw was a perfect newborn, innocent and complete unto herself. "She's beautiful," I said. "Meaning it? She is." James's voice caught slightly. "The adoption will be finalized next week. Mary and David, the adoptive parents, they've promised to send photos, updates. They're good people, Ellie, the kind of parents every child deserves." I nodded, still watching the baby. "And Victoria? How is she doing?" "As well as can be expected. She knew this would be hard, but I think she's at peace with her decision." He hesitated, then added, "She asked about you, actually. Wanted to know if things were complicated," I supplied with a small smile. "That's what things are, but getting less so," he ventured, a question in his voice. I turned to look at him. This man I had loved for so many years, who had hurt me so deeply, who was now standing beside me as we gazed at the child he would never raise. "Yes," I said, softly. "Getting less so." Later that afternoon, I stopped by Victoria's room, a simple bouquet of flowers in hand. I hadn't planned the visit, had actually been on my way out of the hospital when some impulse led me to the maternity floor. She was sitting up in bed, looking exhausted but surprisingly peaceful. She startled slightly when she saw me in the doorway. "Eleanor," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I admitted, setting the flowers on her nightstand. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her tone. "That's very kind of you." An awkward silence fell between us, the strangeness of our situation hanging in the air. What do you say to the woman who slept with your husband, who then gave up their child for adoption, whose son you've saved from a deadly brain tumor? "I saw her," I said finally. "Charlotte. She's beautiful." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "She is, isn't she? I only held her for a few minutes, but—" She swallowed hard. "Mary and David are with her now. They're going to be wonderful parents." "I'm sure they will be." She studied my face, her expression turning serious. "Can I ask you something, Eleanor? Something personal?" I hesitated, then nodded. Do you think it's possible to move forward from all of this? To find some kind of, I don't know, peace with everything that's happened? The question caught me off guard in its directness, its vulnerability. I think, I said slowly, choosing my words with care, that we all made choices that brought us to this point. Some worse than others. I met her gaze directly. But I also think that what matters now is the choices we make going forward. She nodded, seeming to understand what I wasn't quite saying. That while I might eventually forgive, I would never forget the pain she had caused. Jackson's last treatment is next week, she said, changing the subject. After that, we'll be leaving for Portland. I know. We have a follow-up plan in place with a colleague at Oregon Health Sciences University. He's excellent. Trained in our protocol. Will you, she hesitated, will you come say goodbye? To Jackson, I mean. He'd want to thank you himself. I thought of the boy who had faced death with such courage, who had endured treatments with such grace, who wanted to be a doctor like Dr. Mitchell someday. Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss it. Jackson's final treatment fell on a crisp autumn day, the Seattle skyline crystal clear against a rare cloudless sky. He arrived at the clinic with a handmade card and a small, carefully wrapped package. For you, he said solemnly, presenting them to me. Because you fixed the monster in my brain. The card featured a childish but surprisingly detailed drawing of a brain, with a caped superhero labeled Dr. Mitchell battling a scribbled black mass. Inside, in careful printing, thank you for saving my life. I promise to be a good doctor like you someday. The package contained a small silver pin in the shape of a microscope, a child's idea of what symbolized a doctor's work, touching in its simplicity. I love it, I told him, truly moved by the gesture. I'll wear it every day. Even when I'm in Portland? Especially then, I assured him, to remind me of my bravest patient. After his final infusion, after all the scans confirmed what we already knew, that the treatment had worked, that the tumor was in full retreat, Jackson and Victoria prepared to leave the clinic for the last time. We'll come back for the follow-ups, Victoria promised, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And Jackson will write to you about his science fair projects. I'm counting on it, I said, surprised by how emotional I felt at their departure. As they walked out of the clinic doors, Jackson turned back for one final wave, his thin face alight with the boundless optimism of childhood, of a future reclaimed from the shadow of terminal illness. I watched them go, marveling at the strange journey that had brought us all together, then torn us apart, then knitted us, back together in ways I could never have anticipated. James and I continued our careful reconstruction over the months that followed. We attended counseling, separately and together, unpacking the grief we had both suppressed, learning to communicate the pain we had once hidden from each other. It was slow, painstaking work, rebuilding trust that had been so profoundly broken. Victoria. And Jackson settled in Portland, sending occasional updates. His clean scan results, her new job in commercial real estate, their gradual adaptation to life in a new city. Charlotte's adoptive parents sent similar updates to both James and Victoria. First smiles, first words, first steps, maintaining the open communication they had all agreed upon. One evening, nearly a year after Jackson's final treatment, James and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset over Puget Sound. We had recently decided to try living together again, taking another step in our tentative reconciliation. I got an email from Victoria today, James said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Jackson won his school science fair, built a model of the human brain with special emphasis on tumor formation and treatment. I smiled, picturing the serious-faced boy laboring over such a project. He's going to be a brilliant doctor someday. She also mentioned she's seeing someone, a pediatric nurse she met at Jackson's follow-up appointments. I absorbed this information, surprised by the absence of jealousy or resentment. Good for her, I said, meaning it. James reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. I never thought we'd get here, he admitted softly. After everything that happened, everything I did, I thought I'd lost you forever. So did I said honestly. But it turns out that 15 years together creates a foundation that's hard to completely destroy, even with the worst kinds of betrayal. Does that mean you forgive me? He asked, the question he had carefully avoided for months. I considered it, searching my heart for the truth. I think forgiveness isn't a single decision, but a process, one we're still in the middle of. But yes, I'm learning to forgive, day by day. He nodded, accepting this incomplete but honest answer. And us? Do you think we'll ever find our way completely back? Not back, I said, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. Forward, to something new, something strengthened by what we've survived. As darkness settled around us, I thought about the strange, painful, ultimately redemptive journey of the past year. About a dying boy saved by treatment his mother could never have afforded. About a baby girl now growing up with parents who had thought they would never have a child. About a broken marriage slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of hard-won honesty. None of it had happened the way any of us would have chosen. All of it had been forged in pain, in betrayal, in desperate choices and their unexpected consequences. But somehow, from that tangle of human frailty and determination, something like healing had emerged. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And for tonight, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.